Morning and welcome. This is 10 Years Hence. Our focus this morning moves from collaborative intelligence to a different innovation journey. Our speaker, John Schroeder. John Schroeder currently serves as Executive Vice President of Marmon, responsible for retail, food service, and water groups. Prior to this role, John held a variety of executive roles in Marmon, including Executive Vice President of Food and Beverage, President of the Water Group, President of the Residential Businesses in the Water Group, and President of Schroer Technologies. Prior to Marmon, John served as founder, president, and CEO of HydroGlobe, a technology startup company in the water industry and subsequently sold to Marmon. Previously, he held executive roles in engineering, research, and operations with Cypron Chemicals and UOB Chemicals. Additionally, he served on the board of directors for Cypron Chemicals and was involved in the company's leveraged buyout and ultimate sale. Schroeder holds several degrees, including a Bachelor of Science in Engineering, a Master of Science in Chemical Engineering, and a Master of Management Science, all from Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome to the Mendoza College of Business, John Schroeder.
And so originally, Jim asked if I would do this. He started talking to me about all the people who have been here and done this. And there were all these famous people. And I said, I don't want to go. Too many famous people here, but got here. I got the introduction to Jim because my company, my company, and Jim mentioned several, does a lot of work with the Notre Dame Futures Group right now relative to learning how to innovate better. Do you want to know more about that? Mary Scott's in the back and is in charge of that endeavor. For us, it involves hundreds of people, and we indeed are learning a lot about how to innovate better. Mary introduced me to Jim, as I said, and here I am. I'm not sure the formality, how it works here. Feel free to interrupt, ask questions. It'll make me feel better that you're listening and know what I'm saying. And I'm going to be asking quite a few questions of you, so you might as well ask some. So some students here, some not students. And one of the questions that I have, because there's a little bit of technology in this presentation. How many of you have a technical background as well of some kind? And any, like a chemistry area? All do. Oh, well, okay. I can say anything I want to back. So that's good. Sort of a final start for the day. Any of you do Wordle? So I had a 5 today, and it's I hope my day gets better. I only mention it because it's innovation, and so Wordle just really got started in 2021. In 2023, it's the only time I can find stats. 4.8 billion plays of Wordle occurred. So it's innovation. So it's a different kind. So bit of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about my company because when I get a chance to do commercials, I do them. I'm going to give you examples of innovation at Marmon. Then talk about my story with HydroGlobe that Jim mentioned. And at the end, talk a bit about some of the opportunities that exist today at Marmon. So I wouldn't be here at all, regardless of Mary or anything else, except in 1999, I had a daughter who graduated from here and graduated the government in Spanish. And we turned out to love Notre Dame. My trip here today was a walk across the street from the condo we bought here, which is right down the Fairfield Inn. So still a cold walk. I visited West Palm Beach yesterday, and it was 80 degrees. So, but whatever. And talk about Marmon from the standpoint, and Jim said executive vice president. In Marmon, that means that we run several groups. Marmon is organized into 11 different groups of companies, and I typically would be running 3 different groups of that. And again, as Jim said, I have a pretty varied background, not only in industry, he mentioned a lot of that. I've also served on boards of lobbying organizations. I've been involved with my town from the standpoint of the planning board, from the standpoint of a utilities authority. So a lot of different things. And Cylon Chemical, for the MBA students, I think, be interesting. If Cylon was the first leverage buyout that ever occurred, and then we bought out the chemical piece of Cylon from Cylon. So I was an owner of a company, part of a company, and got involved in a lot of really interesting parts of that from the standpoint of even being listed on the stock exchange at one point to ring the bell one morning of the American Stock Exchange. So some pretty cool stuff. So I can talk about Marmon. How many of you have heard anything about Marmon or know what Marmon is? You did? Oh, you didn't raise your hand. Yeah. No. Why do you know Marmon?
They do that as like an innovative fund.
Oh, and we just did one.
Yeah, and I participated 2 years ago.
Did you win?
Actually, I just got off seat too.
So, a diverse company, as I said, about $12 billion today, and really are set up as autonomous companies. For those of you that haven't heard of Marmon, I'm going to guess you've heard of Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett, and that's one of the operating companies under Berkshire. So I absorb the screen for a second. There's a lot of diversity in Marmon. We do everything from tiny little water filters all the way up to we build IMO tank cars, then we lease railroad tank cars. So we're really, really diverse. In the past, that Jim mentioned this, I've directly run the water business, the food service business, and the retail business, and then through the executive vice president role, the electrical business. So why variety of different things? So Marmon is our kind of company that something warrants. But I think, and again, you told me he spoke here at one point.
Well, Don Keogh said he should, and he called my dean, Jack Payne. Jack called me and said, go find this guy. And this was in 1990. I could not get 25 people into the boardroom of the Hayes Healing Center. It just didn't. They thought he was too boring and not particularly famous. The second time we invited him, we had him in Jordan Auditorium, which holds 375. There were 450, I would think, in there on the steps and on the rug and so on. It was a really good event. The third time I invited him, the folks in development, sort of like the Marine Corps or the fire department, I know we need them. I just don't want to be one of them. The folks in development took over the event and moved it to Purcell Pavilion. 11,000 people, jumbotrons, a network television news anchor interviewing him. I went back to my office. So I really do appreciate events such as this in which we can get an opportunity for questions. By the way, though, that fellow said something in Jordan Auditorium that I still quote to this day. An MBA stood up and said, Mr. Buffett, what do you think we should invest in now? He sat down. He thought he was going to get a stock tip, right? Warren Buffett said was, invest in yourself, improve your skills. He said, I'd start with writing and speaking. He said, I would start with those skills that move with you from job to job and place to place. He said, the stock market will always be there. It'll go up, it'll go down, it'll always be there. But your skills are unique to you and you've got to work to make them better. I've never forgot. That was a really good line.
So one of the other things he said, and I think again appropriate certainly for the management students, and he said Charlie Munger really said it. He said, stop buying fair businesses at wonderful prices and instead buy wonderful businesses at fair prices. I can say that again. Stop buying fair businesses at wonderful prices. Buy wonderful businesses at fair prices. And that's the philosophy he's followed. And of course, I think we all know how rich he is. And then right now, Berkshire has $325 billion in cash that he doesn't know what to do with because there are no wonderful businesses available at the price that he's not going to buy something and pay more for it than he should. And again, just a bit of overview again. What billion, as I said, 33,000 employees. We have operations, 600 different facilities, 20 countries, and we sell everywhere in the world. And one consequence of the 33,000 employees, even at normal turnover rates, and that's about what we have about 5,000 jobs open every year. About 2,000 salary jobs are open right now. And I'll give you some data on that later. So the history of Marmon is indeed a history of innovation. It was formed by two brothers, Bob and Jay Pritzker, out of Chicago, who bought their first manufacturing company in 1953. As an aside, J.B. Pritzker, who is the governor of Illinois, is the nephew of those two guys. They got the Marmon name in 1964. And obviously built this into a huge conglomerate. And then in 2008, sold it to Marmon and then Berkshire Hathaway. So, a lot of stories around that time. The grandchildren at one point, and again, grandchildren of Bob and Jay, sued them because they thought we should get our inheritance now. And they won, which is absolutely credible. So each of 16 grandchildren got $1.5 billion. There were two grandchildren, they got for that. So pretty amazing stories when there's that much money. And that was one of the reasons that they had to sell off Marmon because they needed money. And the name comes, again, from this first Marmon motor car company. And they made the Marmon Wasp, which is the car you see there, which actually won the first Indianapolis 500. Again, why do I even bother to show this? Because it's a story of innovation. In that day, race cars would have two people in that little cockpit. One would be facing backwards because they wanted to know where are the other cars, what are they doing? The innovation that drove this to win was a rear view mirror. Again, it's just absolutely incredible. Something that simple could be an innovation. The other innovation was in actually how they ran the race. They ran slower to win. Why? Because tires wore out really fast. And so they ran at a certain speed such that they ended up changing tires one less time than everybody else. So they won. So right now there's a movie actually being made about the Marmon Wasp. It's really being made about the first Indianapolis 500. And the interesting thing for the people in this room is the producer of the movie is an Indiana guy who produced Hoosiers and Rudy. So this is his third Indiana movie. So I'm going to ask questions, hopefully. So what do you think is innovation? Anyway. You better wait on something. Yeah, that's good. I'm hoping for more response to my future questions. I'm going to quote what Mary told me innovation is as we got involved in the work with the Futures Group. It's bringing entirely new things into the world that serve to critically improve life. An inspired and sometimes radical transformation that requires courage, wisdom, and inspiration. So again, a lot of different things. I think also say it means new things. It can mean them at different levels. Marmon does innovation in a variety of different ways. We have a corporate innovation officer, guy Jeff Galasha, who you would have met then at the Innovate-a-thon, or at least see Jeff. And he has a staff, both marketing and engineering types of people, automation people. And we have a 150-person group in Bangalore, India, that does process work, pretty much some core innovation work, some IT work, other things for us as well. So at different level, Marmon has a bunch of stuff. Then in these different 11 groups, we tend to have other things. So in the water group, I have a guy that's VP of innovation. And then we also have a 10-person group in Chennai, India, that's still pretty much more fundamental research. And then the businesses themselves, the other businesses do some innovation as well. So we have innovation at a water level. I think it works. It's pretty efficient. Okay. I'm going to say 80% of you on your person right now, something that bothers. And it's because you're going to have an iPhone or smartphone of some part. I really wish we made the smartphones. We don't. But there are some really tiny screws in that phone. We don't even make the screws. We make a little bit of a special material that keeps the screws in place. So we're ubiquitous. Things are everywhere. As far as the house itself, how many of you have a water softener? Okay, that's good. What sort of things do you like or don't like about the water softener?
Getting the guy to carry those 45 bags of salt down the stairs.
So we know this. We are the largest manufacturer of water softeners in the world, but we know this salt thing's a big problem. And it's carrying, it's adding pollution, all these sort of things. So in our India lab right now, we have 4 different projects going on that can soften water without using salt. And that's the sort of things we look at. Yeah, we own the market today. Not quite, but we're pretty strong. But we're still doing work to improve it and to do better. We make wire that you would find in your oven because it's special, high temperature types of wire. And then we find wire that you make wire that you find just in the walls of your house. And if you go to Home Depot and buy wire, the odds are we made it. We make products at McDonald's as well. And I single out McDonald's a bit here, but many, many other of the QSRs, quick serve restaurants that use our products. And just one briefly about 2, because they're, again, innovation stories in a way. On the right-hand side, it's number 7. We have something we call the Savor King. And the Savor King slices tomatoes. This sounds like could there be any innovation in this? But people slice tomatoes a long time. They just had a knife and they would be slicing the tomatoes. And guess what happened? People cut themselves. They got hurt. We invented this device that you just plug the tomato in, come down, no lossable contact, the way it's designed and innovated to get in cuts. And so it's a really big deal. And it's really saved a lot of accidents. In the bottom right, item 9, we have something we call the ABS, automated beverage dispenser. So if you go to a quick serve restaurant, turns out that today 55% of the orders at a quick serve restaurant occur through the drive-through. And so you go into the drive-through, there's a point of sale type device. You talk to somebody, you do whatever. And the way that this machine works, you get the order directly from the point of sale to this machine, and it's pouring continuous drinks as people will go through. Why is it important? Well, right now, the biggest problem in the quick serve industry, many industries, is finding labor to actually work the store, to work the plant, whatever it might be. The turnover of the quick serve restaurants 100% per year, which is just an astronomical sort of number. Typically might be 15% somewhere else. So this helps them by saving some labor. Maybe they need a little bit less from a people set so they can keep running. But second, I said 55% of the orders are through the drive-through. Their most important thing is how fast you can get through the drive-through. Right now, typical, if you saw 6 cars, this is what I know from the industry stuff I get, 6 cars in line, you won't go. You'll just stop. You'll go somewhere else. They want to get somebody through the drive-through in 20 seconds. So this is what helps do it. So again, innovation at a really significant level.
John, to what extent is AI changing any of that? I remember an experiment with McDonald's where they had people at remote locations in Idaho somewhere taking orders and punching them in and come up on a screen at the Mishawaka restaurant. It would seem to me that artificial intelligence would be right for that kind of a task?
It probably is. I can tell you from the standpoint of Mom and their competitors, we're starting to scratch the surface of what AI can do and what types of things we can bring to a McDonald's. But I think you're absolutely right. It will again transform how these places operate over the next few years. And then finally, one other example, which is I say in the sky. If you've flown recently on a fairly newer aircraft, you'll know almost every seat back has a video of some kind. There's plugs and power at every seat. So more and more getting that way. That takes a really special kind of wire because they don't want the electrical current to disrupt the plane's avionics. So we make those kind of wires, we produce them, and we're in probably almost every Boeing plane that's out there for that. So I'm going to switch gears, going to talk about my experience relative to entrepreneurship. And so when I earlier said, okay, I was at this company, Marmon Chemicals, we actually sold it. I didn't say that. And I was out looking for something else to do. I was probably not the most normal person from the standpoint of where I was in my career to become an entrepreneur. I mean, I could tell you that, but roughly, I was about 50 when I started that, which, you might not think is normal. I'll talk more about that later. And I wasn't deliberately looking for an entrepreneur job. My networking led me there. Something that I won't regret for sure. So the startup, and I a couple of slides that are high level that I'm going to go back and go into it. So the startup, the company was named Hydroglow. It was a university-based startup. The opportunity that existed, and just that has to be a marketing opportunity for these types of things, was the EPA had lowered in the U.S. the limit for arsenic in your drinking water from 50 parts per billion to 10 parts per billion. Sounds low, but even at 10 parts per billion, there was a 1 in 300 lifetime cancer risk if you were exposed to arsenic at that level. So I think everybody here knows arsenic kills you, but very few people know. The really more endemic issue is this cancer risk. So arsenic is pretty commonly occurring chemical. Strangely, it is the 12th most occurring natural chemical in the U.S. So another question, what do you think is the most common element?
Hydrogen?
I'll get to that. Hydrogen actually is the most common element in the universe. So now let's talk about Earth alone. No. Close. It's funny. You're all reading it. So oxygen is actually the most common, but not what you think as you're breathing it. That was false. It's the most common because the Earth's core is iron oxide, and it's the oxide in that makes it the most common element. So, but very common. It is not generally, always in groundwater from wells, not for the arsenic, not in the typically rivers and lakes. So then I did a little bit of look because I thought it'd be nice to know what's the water in South Bend like. And so I can tell you that in South Bend, the town publishes a report every year. Says here's what's in your water. That 3% of the wells that the taps, because they actually do this at the tap in South Bend, have lead at greater than the minimum contaminant level that you're supposed to have. Actually, contaminant level you're supposed to have. There's a lot of trihalomethanes in the water. And that comes from the chlorination of the water and actually occurring organic material that makes trihalomethanes. And then you've all heard of the forever chemicals, I'm sure, the PFOAs and so forth, the carbon-derived chemicals. And it's present at a level of about 1 to 2 parts per trillion from the samples that they analyzed. 4 parts per trillion is the allowable level. So there are things in the water below the EPA contaminant level, but still there. And then again, as we talked about water softeners, the water in this area is incredibly hard water, a lot of calcium in the water. So you really need water softeners. We looked at the approaches to solve and again, this was a technology developed at a university. Eventually, we evolved a technology and sold the company to Marmon Water, but that's getting ahead of the story. And just up front, the realities of doing something like this is that it's ups and downs. It's a roller coaster emotionally and in a lot of other ways. I looked at some stats. 1 out of 10 roughly entrepreneurs succeed doing something like this. And I mean, succeed substantially. A couple out of those 10 break even to give them. The rest fail. VCs know all this. So they get portfolios of this stuff. They don't just try to invest in one. They want to invest in 100 because they'll work the odds and get to where you actually make some money. So HydroGlobe was the name of the startup. As I said, it was named by 3 professors, and I'll talk a bit about how that came about, who invented some technology and saw an advantage in it for arsenic. Now, part of it was a humanitarian reason. I mentioned the U.S. and the decent amount of arsenic in the U.S., but India, Bangladesh, China had far worse situations. So they were really trying to solve a problem in those type of countries where it wasn't only cancer was killing people, but there were skin diseases and all kind of other things. So they did a lot of work to try to develop a technology that then they could dumb down to a point where it was easy to use for people in those type of situations. And got it to the point where you injected a little thimbleful of chemical into a bucket of water, poured the bucket through sand, and got rid of the arsenic. So, but that was really more their motivation. And then they saw, well, maybe there could be something here that would actually be a company. So Stevens was working on this approach back, this is in the mid to late 90s, what they call technogenesis, which blended science and engineering education with innovation and then with nurturing new high-tech companies. And it wasn't all that normal back then. Today, I think there's a lot of incubators and this sort of thing. They were committed to this approach, and they were trying to learn how to make the model a success. So HydroGlobe was the 3rd company that they tried to put through this. So the driver was arsenic. Again, groundwater, really prevalent. 10% of all the wells in the United States have arsenic above this level that the EPA was saying could be an okay level, which that wasn't even an okay level. And so one thing about arsenic, again, this gets back to chemistry, sorry about this, but it's really, really interesting material. Arsenic is a cation, but that's not how it exists in nature. It exists as what they call an oxyanion, meaning only that there's an oxygen molecule and an arsenic molecule, and it's an anion. It exists in 2 different valence states. As you could say, notes, we become chemists after us. And so one is a valence state of 5, the other 3. The only thing that means, and it's to the whole thing of what we were trying to do, is 5 was ionic. You can do certain things to remove it from water. 3 is neutral. It's much more difficult to remove from water. And they both were not easy to remove economically. And again, EPA is really searching for technology. Nobody knows how to do this at this point, but we got a new standard. We've got to do something. So again, they founded HydroGlobe. Unlike many startups, there was no money. So this is not a great way to start off a life like this. They were doing some work with DARPA, which is the government defense, high-tech research tech arm of the government. They got a little bit of grant money from them. They set up the company in an interesting way. Each of the 3 professors, they gave 10% ownership to, which is somewhat of a unique model. They brought me in, gave me 10% of the company, and Stevens remained owning 60% of the company. Despite that, we had no money. and we were still being charged rent to be having space in their building. So got pretty interesting. Excuse me for a second. So the early months were crazy. I mean, they were absolutely crazy. We're housed in a building on River Street in Hoboken, New Jersey. The only really other important fact about Hoboken is this was just a few doors down from where Frank Sinatra lived, and it was born. Um, and my very first job was to buy a desk from IKEA and a satellite. Right? So you really did get to do pretty much everything.
You still working on that?
I did. That desk was still there. No, it's literally just important. We to try to get some idea what the market thought, did they care about the sort of technologies we had. We did, it's a weird second, lunch and learns with a lot of engineering contracting companies. And so lunch and learn means you go to an engineering company, you buy pizza for their engineers, and they are forced to listen to you for half an hour. But it was good. We started to get to figure out, was anybody caring about this? I had a lot of contacts from my previous life at that point, especially from this lobbying group in the chemical industry, a lot of different environmental engineers. So we ended up going, and they would let me come and talk to them. I ended up getting a consultant as one of the guys that I had known from the industry. And again, did a lot of work trying to get their interest. We did get a little money. We're doing some trials. I'll talk a bit more about this later. But so this started out as arsenic, but we did this trial at one of the technologies at Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey for a lead removal project. And so it worked okay, but this technology was perfect for it. I thought something was a little scary. So the reason that there was a lead issue at the arsenal was they had a big berm that they would do firing exercises into. And if you hit the berm, it was fine. The bullets were sort of contained. They changed the berm out periodically. If they were short and it hit the ground, the lead would eventually leak into the groundwater, and the lake was really polluted. That was really polluted. I was a little bit disturbed by how often the bullets actually missed the berm. But yeah, it's something that turned into a nice trial and a little bit of money. Didn't get any other grants, but particularly, and again, barely paid the rent. But you get all kinds of unique experiences in these kinds of things. Stevens had a relationship with a U.S. congressman named Bob Franks. And so he became a consultant to my company, which again was interesting because we didn't have any money. But he was a consultant for the company. And there was a lot of government money in theory. So I got to go through the halls of Congress a couple of times, talking with senators, congressmen, et cetera, trying to pitch the projects. Again, didn't ever come to any fruit from the standpoint of money, but great experience, something that helped us out. Two technologies were called Theramet and ActiveMet. Theramet was pretty simple, little bit of high chemical called chloride, pump it into the water, and give it a little bit of time, give it some sand to sit on, and it would precipitate out the arsenic. And so, okay, pretty good stuff. And it did work. ActiveMet was much more complicated. It just took point higher violence and vibrated them, because if you didn't violate them, I think everybody pretty much would guess what iron and water and oxygen leads to, which is rust and then completely immobilizing. So you wanted to pass stuff through this iron. So again, pretty neat technology from the standpoint of innovation. A lot of different difficulties that we saw in terms of how we're going to make it work. So we did get some trials of these. We went to a town called Hopewell in New Jersey and looked at a experiment trial to removing the arsenic. So if you look on the left, you got a couple of tanks, so they contained the ferric chloride solution and the well house housing the town's well there. And then on the right side, you can see at the very bottom on the left, there's a pump that was needling in the ferric chloride. And then the long cylindrical tank is a sand filter. when we removed the sand. So it really worked. It did. And it was wound up pretty cheap, about 50 cents a 1,000 gallons to be able to remove the arsenic. Keeps people safe, sounds good. But 50 cents might not have been good enough. So again, another question. How much does water cost you? Do anybody have any idea what they're in? Forget your water bill that you $50 or $100 a month. So we would look at how much does it cost you per 1,000 gallons of water. So it costs about, the average in the US today is $1.50 per 1,000 gallons from a municipal tap. So there's no better market in life, let me assure you. But 50 cents more per 1,000 gallons this technology is going to cost. It was too expensive. So people weren't going to do it. Then just a brief picture on the other technology, active method. You look all the way over far left. You have a stainless steel tank that housed the iron filings, just little iron shavings. And then those two little wet things are vibrators that end up vibrating the tank so that, in fact, it wouldn't freeze up the iron into rust. Interesting part there. And it worked. Absolutely worked. In this case, it worked for beyond even arsenic and others. It removed chromium and it removed nickel and a variety of other metals, but too expensive. Wasn't going to work. So here I am. I've been here now 6 months at this startup, and I'm really looking at these things and saying, this isn't going to work. The processes are good, too expensive for whatever reason. So, again, it was interesting. I'm being the university set up. I had full access to the professors that had invented the technology. And as I went around and talked to the professors, I found in the lab, in the skunk works, something else. And it really looked interesting. It was way more similar to some of my early experiences and what I had been involved in selling and businesses I had run prior. So, and similar in a bunch of ways, but one was in the form in which we buy this product. So I put Eureka, but in fact, it saved the chance to even have a startup and a company. It was a material based on titanium dioxide that we trade name Metzor, and clearly was going to be something that was good for arsenic removal. But it's in the lab, and maybe a few grams were being made. So it's not going to be easy either. As you do these things, one of the things you want to do and make sure is nobody else can come and steal the ideas, right? So we looked at, what do we do? Do we patent it? Do we keep it at really keen trade secrets? How do we approach this? A combination of both partners. And the material was pretty unique. So we thought route was probably the right way to go. But then we would keep, as I said, some of the items as trade secrets. Has anybody here ever been involved with the patent process? Copyright. Copyright also interesting because getting the trade name Metzor was quite a treat because when you think about it, Metzor sounds like something anybody would think of, but we were able to get it. But as far as the patent process, the way it works now in the United States is if you're the first person to file, you won't. But back then it was whoever thought of it first, they could prove they thought of it first, could actually get invalidate even a patent. But we thought, okay, this is important to do. So we filed in 2001 a provisional patent application. And again, with a provisional in the US, what happens is you file this thing, it's got a bunch of stuff about what you're doing. You have 1 year to file a real. So with 1 day short of that 1 year, we filed our real patent in 2002 and then continued the process. So the way the process works in the patent office, you go, you file, you get office actions, i.e. questions back from them, and they say, this isn't right, doesn't work, whatever. So a lot of different work. One thing I learned during this process is you know it better than anybody else. And attorneys are great. They're really smart. They understand the patent process. They might even understand a little bit about what you do, but they don't understand as much as you do. So I learned, I was involved in every step of the way. And most important was really to find some of the white spaces to where there was a possibility to really get them. Because people knew about titanium and then it maybe worked, but it was all different kind of ways. So, sorry. Okay, here's the real quiz for later. So there were certain reasons why this worked. And again, I know this is sort of crazy, all this technology stuff, but the real reason it worked is that you formed a crystal when you processed this. But this crystal had a primary size. You just have to think of this as sort of just a little thing like this. The primary size of one side of that little crystal was 6 nanometers if it was going to work. And a nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter. So you have to sort of wrap your mind around this. It's obviously really, really small. Otherwise, it wasn't going to work. So we found that it did work. Not only removed arsenic and other materials this size, but obviously really special material. If it was 11 nanometers, everybody knows white paint. What makes white paint white is titanium dioxide, but a bigger size. So we made it, and we would have made it too big of a size, wouldn't have worked, but we could have sold it for white paint. It wouldn't have really helped us. So a lot of liar, as I said, definitely there was white space. We could have claimed the material itself. We didn't. Just as important was specifying the method by which we made it. So we ended up saying, okay, you got to make it in this exact way and that exact way, and it'll end up doing what it's supposed to do. We looked at both temperature history. That was part of the process. If you made it too hot, the white paint, so forth and so on. A lot of things we learned as we were going through this, but we're still making a gram of material here or there. Nonetheless, Hydroglow was going to move forward. It was going to move forward on the basis of Metsorb and the Metsorb technology, Ferromet, Active Met. At that point, we're each history. Again, we found that it could remove other materials. The one that we found that was really important was lead. So it could remove arsenic and lead. And again, really unique because I'll go back to this anion cation thing. Arsenic is an anion. Lead's a cation, yet this material removed both. A couple of different processes by which it did that chemically, but it was unique, but still a lab trick. So I need to do more. Again, professor's making it in grams. I got to do more. Don't know how to build a lamp. I've never done that before. So I contracted a retired industry guy that I knew, and he was able to put together the equipment and so forth and outfit a lab with all the equipment we would need to make and test the product at least on a somewhat bigger lab scale, 100 grams. So anyway, at that point, I said, okay, I got a lab coming. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. I'm not good at lab work either. Don't really like it. Don't do it. And so we hired a grad student to do it at the time, $10 an hour. Doesn't sound like that. So you do the inflation, it's 20 today, maybe 25. So not too bad. And he was supposed to do the lab work and then did a great job in doing it. So we were able to start doing a bit more than we had done before. So I'll let you love this picture. It really doesn't look like much. And believe me, it was not. It was home, however, for us. And we were able to take that space that Stevens gave us, they needed to charge us for it, and do what we needed to do. And we needed to find again that we could make 100 grams. The process would still work the same, that it would still take arsenic out. And so indeed, we were making hundreds of grams. Still not very commercial, 100 grams for sure. So we got it in the lab. We need product. We need tens of pounds, hundreds of pounds, tons of material to really be able to go out and do this. Now, yeah, I'll bore you only for a minute. This was a complicated process. I was amazed how many people, if they thought you were doing something for good, and this is a big deal here, I know this, that they would help you. They would do stuff that people wouldn't do otherwise. They would charge you, but people help. So people make titanium dioxide in plants that make hundreds of millions of pounds per year. We needed a stream from the middle of that plant, and we needed drums of material. And the first one I went to them, they said, "You're out of your mind. We're not doing this. So yeah, way too much trouble for us. Yeah, we're not going to make any money." But we got to the right people, and indeed, they put a system in to give us drums of material. I found a guy who would do the next step, which was turning it into a fine powder by drying this liquid. And again, so really, really inexpensive, able to do it. And so, yeah, again, absolutely amazing. And then the next step in the process, we had to obtain tiny powder, 1 micron, so 1/1,000,000th of a meter. And we had to turn it into something that you could actually use, that water would flow through. And I had known a guy that found manufacturer, that was his job. And he said, "I'll do it. I'll just find them. Don't worry about it. If you ever get any real business, I'll figure out some way to compensate." And we found it was a small company up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, that would do this next step for us. And again, they weren't making any money. It was really, again, tiny for them. In fact, so tiny that their normal business, this company, was to make big equipment that would make fertilizer and those things. Again, big processes, big stuff. They happened to have a little pilot plant where they would test out stuff for the customer, just our equipment really well. And one of the ones that would be common to everybody, then they tested the calculator there to say, "Oh, we make calculator in this type of equipment." But the equipment was really perfect for what we wanted to do. So again, they put their people on it. They let us use the equipment, and again, charging us almost nothing. And a couple of side benefits too. So I was doing everything. I was out there. At the end of the day, I would be white. I know it's white, even though it's not white paint. And they got to know me well enough, like me well enough, that they said, "Here's the key. We're not here on the weekends, but you can come in. You need to do some lab work. You need to do this." So great, do it. So I got to do that. Better story for any of the football that might be out here is they also had a box at Lambeau Field. So I got to attend several games. Okay. I'm a Bear fan. Seeing the Green Bay Packers wasn't all that much fun, but it was still nice to see you. All right. We finally found a way to get some product. Eventually, people are going to start charging us for it. So we got to do something. And so, then at that point, they didn't have enough money to pay me even. So I was getting stock. So that was a pretty good thing in the law, instead of being paid. But we needed funding to now make enough product to be able to really get it out there in a marketplace, see what it would do, that sort of thing. So funding's a whole other exciting area that I didn't know anything about. And so I talk to people and they say, sometimes you go to your friends, maybe whatever. So I ended up finding 7 friends who would invest in the company. 7 friends invested $300,000 in the company. But you want to talk about pressure. There is no more pressure than your friends giving you money. No matter how many times you told them, you got an 80, 90% chance of losing every penny. Now the pressure's on for sure. I found a group of angel investors who were willing to put some money in. And after the angel investors did, all of a sudden a boutique VC said, "Oh, wait, there's something here. Let's get into." So we were able to raise a total of about $1.5 million. Again, not a lot of money, but enough to let us get going, to be able to make some product, get some stuff out there, get some product tested, and see how it goes. Now I could actually hire some people too, which was nice because pretty much still I was doing everything other than the work. So we needed to be able to do production. It takes a certain kind of person. I hired an engineer that had a perfectly good career at Procter & Gamble, but he was excited to be part of a startup, wanted to see what that felt like, what it was like. And of course, he got some stock options. That was nice for him too. Good salary. I had a second guy who was in the industry and in a company called Engelhard. Engelhard owned the market for material that you could put into products such as carbon to take out lead. And so we knew lead was going to be important to what we were doing. Well, and he had the best motivation because they had terminated his employment and he wanted rebate. So I now have a 4-person team and we're really ready to go. We went out, we had this material, we were doing more testing. You can see the little the canisters, cartridges of titanium dioxide there. And we're back in another government site, this time depleted uranium. That probably should scare you less because the uranium is actually present in a lot of groundwater, as it turns out. But it was, unfortunately, again, no money, no sale. We couldn't get the government. The government did what it did. They had depleted uranium in the groundwater site, so didn't happen. So now we're getting to the point we really do need customers. We got money slowly being used, but we really need customers. And from my past life again, I had no Brita. Anybody here have a Brita picture? That's great. Does anybody here buy a long last filter? So it lasts 3 times as long. Please do. Because product today, that sort of is that product today, they're long lens Brita filters. In any event, that wasn't the product we worked on with Brita at first. They were developing a product that would go on the end of your faucet and it would remove a lot of stuff. And 2 things they wanted it to remove, amongst others, were lead and mercury. So they were working with a Japanese company using hollow wires to remove a bunch of stuff. They needed a material to remove these metals. And I knew them. I had been talking to them prior. They remembered me. This guy called on us. So they called me back. And in the end, we worked with them to develop the product and to be able to put it into the center tap filter. Wasn't easy. Brita is a big company. I had 4 employees. Brita has standard procedure manuals that are hundreds of pages long. I didn't have time to read them, much less do them. So they helped. They came to my facility, my rented facility in Green Bay, and they made sure that this worked. They weighed some requirements that they had. They made sure that they would be able to use the product. And indeed, pretty amazing. At this point, they actually started buying product. And they, in 2004, bought over $1 million worth of product, which was a lot of profit for us. Started to help again, give us a bunch of money to be able to keep going. And now we even need things like warehousing and shipping and production, typical production stuff. Again, Pico, their company, they helped out a lot, but we were able to continue to go and start to build credibility out there. Because you got a customer like a Brita, people say, hey, you must be real. There's something here. You know, it was helping us as we continued to go out into the marketplace and talk to others. But further validation, Dow Chemical, which was Dow Chemical back then, now it's our DuPont Dow and pretty much spread to the winds. They wanted an arsenic pond. And I knew Dow really well. I had done a lot of business with them in my prior life again. And so they were both a customer, they were a competitive, and they were a supplier in my life and past life. They wanted this technology badly. So we ended up negotiating with them and finally worked out an agreement where only Dow and Hydrocloak could manufacture the product going forward, but it was a licensing agreement where they had the right to use our technology to make and sell the product. Really worked out extremely well. The deal included minimum royalties, so even if they didn't use the technology, they had to pay us some money every year, and that was good. I always found it a little bit ironic because Dow, this huge company, the reason they bought it is they thought they could make it way better. This is great technology. We're going to really figure this out. We're going to win the world. They bought the product from Hydro for 10 years. They could never figure out how to make it themselves better than we were doing it as this little startup company. But again, a lot of money, more important, ability for the company. And again, it just kind of showed sort of how the product looks. It's again, pretty small particles. A 16 mesh particle is 350 microns. Remember, micron, 1 millionth of a meter. And so small, but water could flow through it and around it. It was all we needed. And we had a few different grades of product. Today there's more. We had a few different grades of product and basically could remove a lot of chemicals and things. And you can see the list there. And I didn't include, I should have on the slide, mercury, because mercury turned out to be pretty important for people as well. It's present in a lot of groundwater. So, but a lot of different grades, a lot of different applications work extremely well. And we were making some traction in a variety of different marketplaces, especially and I talked about carbon. Carbon blocks are used in a lot of the different water treatment that you'll see. If you have an under-the-counter water filter, there's going to be a carbon block in there. If you have a refrigerator filter, there's a carbon block. Almost nobody just does carbon. They put an additive like Ometsort into it, so it removes other stuff like arsenic, mercury, and lead.
Is there a market for those things you're removing? Is there a secondary market? Can you sell the boron, uranium, selenium, or
It would be really difficult to take it out, the carbon, really tightly.
so it's captured?
It's very tightly bound to the carbon. So yeah, unfortunately, no secondary market. But again, being sold in a lot of different applications or at that point, not in quantities. So my guy, Bob Russo, this is this guy I hired that from Engelhard who wanted the revenge. He knew a lot of players in the industry that made carbon blocks or did other things. And so we were making sales calls on everybody. And so in 2004, middle of the year, we called out a company called Graver Technologies and the division of Marmon Water. And based on what we were telling them, they loved the food. And so I thought, okay, maybe we're going to sell some stuff here. It's really great. The next day, this director called me and said, we love the product. We buy the company. And so, yeah, really, really interesting for us. That wasn't so sure my investors would love it yet, but reasons that they should. So indeed, we said, let's talk. Let's figure it out. So 6 tough months. And I say that because we pretty much decided we're going to sell the company. We really are running out of money at this point. We could out work on the investors. But, at this point, same time, at the university, Stevens had never sold a company. I mentioned we were the third company they brought in. Selling a company was a skill they didn't have. And so they bought certain things. And unfortunately, what they thought was really important, because in all the different stock agreements that got signed over time, each getting more complicated. Every time I had brought in another group of investors, they retained blocking rights to a sale of the company. So we could sell the company. And at that point, they owned less than 50% based on all the dilutions that had happened. If they didn't want to sell, we weren't selling. Wasn't happening. So we ended up really back and forth. They wanted to keep IP future rights. So they then ended up, their chemists, their lab professors, et cetera, and develop newer technology based on this technology. They would own it, not us as Marmon. And obviously not acceptable, because that would mean they made one good advance on everything that we just paid for. Was out the window, wasn't working. So again, I learned things I never even imagined I would learn during this process. I had to go back to every investor. Now, not that was that many at this point, 7 friends and family, 10 angels, myself, who I can easily talk to, the producers, and basically 20, 25 people. I had to get them all to agree to give up some of their money when we sold the company to the university. So they eventually all agreed they would give up 20% of their money. Finally, Stevens was happy. The investors got 2.5 times their money for basically 1.5 years of having invested. So they were pretty happy. And Marmon's been pretty happy too. So shows us, initially we spent some money. They did to improve the product, spent several $1,000,000 the first couple of years to improve the product performance. But it's been nice, steady growth. Today it's about a $10 million a year revenue product. Our product to survive this long is actually pretty interesting, but no other technologies come along that's done better. And during these 20 years, as far as lead removal, we've been number one or number two in the market in terms of how the product has performed. I did a calculation at one point, study to see these things and be able to go back to Angelo, who is my boss at the moment, and tell him, we did good. And so the return on investment, at least at this point of the history, is about 20% for them. So pretty decent return.
Who are your main customers? Who buys this from you?
Yeah, so Rhythm is still a big customer. And then there are it's about 10 companies. Like that. Some people are like a Pentair and other companies like that make 3M, that make carbon blocks for refrigerators would buy our stuff. There are towns that buy it for their systems for removal of arsenic. So it's a pretty eclectic mix of different group of customers.
Does Zero Water use it?
Yeah, Zero Water is a great thing. Now, so Zero Water uses an ion exchange resin, a mixed, I'm sorry, a lot of engineer guys do this, but what's called a mixed bed ion exchanger. And they're interested not because that's good. Mixed bed ion exchange takes out only minerals, cations and anions. Doesn't take out anything else at all. And but Zero Water is the most clever, innovative company in the world because they put this little device on that measures something. But nobody, even I can guarantee almost nobody does what it measure. All it does is measure whether or not there's dissolved solids in the water. It's a conductivity meter, but that means you'll go out and buy another cartridge when it clicks down to is bad stuff. So very, very clever. We don't provide them with a product, but another division of Graver Technologies provides them with about 50% of the ion exchange resin they use. So, and then a bit cleverness served us too. We were able to get some business.
John, it seems to me that there are two industries that have very high needs for water filtration. One, of course, would be carbonated beverages, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, so on. The other is the silicon chip industry, where the water has to be incredibly pure.
Yeah.
Are you engaged with those folks?
Yeah, but to different degrees. So in the carbonated beverage industry, and again, I run the food service business. We sold beverage dispensers. If you go to probably about 50% of beverage dispensers in the United States come out of our food and beverage business. That water has to be pretty uniform when it goes into those kind of machines. So all of them have carbon black filters, and a lot of those contain our material because they mainly want to take out chlorine, honestly, because chlorine affects the taste of water.
Yeah.
But they would prefer there wasn't arsenic and lead. They did it sell. They buy it. Semiconductor is a little bit different. So semiconductor requires a incredibly pure water. We would have used to say is 18.3 megdal. Why? Because it's a lot of resistance. Water, even fast current through water, the more salt, the easier it is. So they measure how pure the water is by how much voltage it takes to get the current to flow across that water. But it's mostly reverse osmosis and that type of thing. They'll have a carbon filter to take out some stuff, but reverse osmosis will take out some of these arsenic and other things as well. So it tends to be more that type of technology. So I had a lot of learnings during this. I've alluded. Oh, so I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm an engineer. I was with Exxon Research and Engineering in New Jersey while you were doing your work at Stevens. And a related subject, there seems to be a lot of talk about microplastics. Can you say something about, are you doing anything in that area? Is it something concern for the average person?
Okay, those were two different questions. And I have an opinion on the second. But let me answer first. Yeah. So again, we do with these carbon blocks and other types of filtration technology. We have some polyethylene, polypropylene type cartridge filters. We have other filters that use nano filtration types of technologies. And we are always looking at those because we know that's going to become an issue where even if it's not a particular health issue, it's going to be an issue for the public. They're going to want this space. So we're working from that standpoint, the same as we're working on these forever chemicals and a variety of the newer contaminants that are starting to become concerns for people. Yeah. I don't think they know enough on microplastics yet to know what level, if any, is harmful. But it's ubiquitous again, like the chemicals, it's everywhere. And so they're not sure do a lot of work. I would have liked to do.
We all have refrigerator filters. Are you in that business?
Yeah.
More global?
So great question. Do you know that the refrigerator filter market is only a U.S. market? No other countries in the world we do that. So, however, anybody who sells refrigerators in the U.S. will do this. So Samsung, LG from South Korea, for example, are big players in the refrigerator market in the U.S. So the broad answer to the question is, yeah. We make all the way to a filter encased in the plastic, exactly as you would put it into your refrigerator. For some companies, we just make that carbon in, and then they put the plastic on it. I would say we are in 50% of the refrigerators, one way or the other in the United States. We sell to every major refrigerator manufacturer. And every one of those blocks has been sorted because they all want to be able to claim it takes out lead.
When another engineer or a chemist, sorry, I've done about a lot. This past year, you're the first person who has told that you did some lobbying. I'm curious, how did you get into lobbying? So has it helped you as a business leader? And so how? And then do you see anyone using AI with respect to
So I got into it because I was in the chemical business in New Jersey. It was obviously a state where there was a lot of environmental regulation, a lot of things that you wanted to make sure you were doing right. And you also had to make sure you didn't have to do things that didn't make sense. So the chemical industry has a nationwide group. New Jersey had its own group. And I just became a representative of our company on the group, but eventually grew to becoming the chairman of the group. And yeah, again, what we tried to do is just make sure the balance of economics and environment, right? I don't know the AI. It gets on a small subset, and you know how many environmental regulations are. There's a jillion. And so in our company, we have a lot of, I'm going to call it hello regulations. We call them standard practice instructions. And we're using AI right now to be able to allow people to easily find things they need out of the hundreds of thousands of pages of standard practice. I see something like that.
and as your career as a lobbyist or Albany's lobbyist, has that helped you as a business leader?
So I wasn't really a lobbyist, but I was heading a lobby group. But yeah, it did because of the interaction with the types of people I got interactions with. So I was talking to regulators, I was talking to politicians. Every point of view helps form you in terms of being somebody who knows a little more, can do a little, I think.
You mentioned that like one of the biggest problems at the beginning when you were doing research was having a economically feasible product. How did that come down over time? Was it the manufacturing processes? And what was like the end point that you ended up at? Was it 50 cents per 100 gallons, or when did you get it?
So absolutely crucial. And it got better as you made more. That's true with most things, right? So that, when we're making grams, we're caught ridiculous amount of money. But as you started to make pounds and then tens of pounds, you got to an economic point. So what I was talking about was the actual cost of water in that. So it's all worked out.
Do you have any biochemists in your group?
Interestingly enough, with the guy who did all the carbon block for it was a biochemist, but in general, not something we have a lot of.
You may be interested to know that on Monday this week, the Washington Post ran an article. It's a really short article about some domestic biochemists and microbiologists who discovered a microbe, multicellular organism that thrives on arsenic. Yeah, have you read that?
I don't need to read that one because back in 1990, there were folks doing that type of work. And, you know, a lot of different plants that will.
So is there a possibility to get microbes to eat arsenic?
Absolutely. Put it into a product that you can sell again. That would be starting all over. I can only tell you this. I'm not going to do it. Done enough. So anyway, I wanted to just put some of the overall learnings here for you to think about. My past experiences were crucial. Last week in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article by a guy named Ben Cohen. He actually said something none of you are going to believe, but here's what they found when they look at how do you get a successful deal going with a startup. It has to be people who have connections, credibility, industry experience, relationships, know the rules of business, and know how to break them. And a group of economists from MIT and Penn had done a study that he drew on. The average age of a successful startup entrepreneur is 45. So it's not just when you come out of college, it's when you got these experiences. Obviously, you need to wear a lot of hats. Traction, getting business, obviously crucial on a lot of fronts. Focus. We had, with our website, thousands of opportunities, and you really had to figure out which ones am I going to, not good, quality, 5 people at the end. Credibility, crucial. It was hard. Again, that was a fan of heart. And I look back and said, if I knew all this stuff, would I have done it? Maybe not. And then eventually the resources from Marmon, they were crucial. So a lot of different things went into making a successful business. It's a small one, granted, but it's a nice niche business for Marmon today, and generates profit and does a lot of good as well. The same.
So other questions. We have a few minutes here.
So did this look like when the company was bought by Marmon? Is that when you moved over to the company, or was that okay?
So yeah, I'll make that a very long story short. So I ended up going to help integrate the startup into Marmon. And then again, I mentioned this guy is okay at the layout. He then asked, "Well, would you run this other business for me? And would you run this other business?" And so, over the last 20 years, because I've been in Marmon 20 years, I just got more and more responsibility pretty much every year. So it's been quite cool vibe for sure.
You talk about a couple of negatives of like working in entrepreneurship. Overall, how was that experience for you? Like, what did you prefer between that and big business?
I think everybody should do it once. It's the way I'm going to answer this. I think it teaches you so much, but learn some stuff first, then let it teach you some of these other things. But it's that big business, there's a lot of things happen every day. The balance of things is generally pretty positive if you're doing a good job. But yeah, we have a big staff and team and all that. The negative is when bad things happen. Like, what do you do? Like, I mean, I'm like Daisy. This is not going to work. So, yeah,
You don't necessarily have a playbook.
there is no playbook or something like this now.
He asked about your opinion on microplastics, or he asked about microplastics. You said you'd give us your opinion.
My opinion is it's not a problem. Not at the levels they're at today. There's no evidence that I've seen that suggests it is, but it's my opinion.
Does that include the blood-brain barrier? They found microplastics penetrating.
And as well as they found PFOAs in every single of the being's blood. It's just questionable at level does it really do anything.
So you mentioned that like 80 to 90% of startups fail. What were some of the factors that you think helped you get from being one of the less likely The less likely, but still successful startups.
Me, obviously. No. The technology was really good. It needed a lot of nurturing and so forth and so on. I mean, if the technology didn't work, it wouldn't have been able to work. So the technology was, I think, the prime reason. It was a really, really good technology. And the few people I hired, they were really dedicated. They worked really hard, really hard.
Okay. One more question. Jump on John Schroeder.
A huge one on this plot of the students that, especially because, like I said, we have 2,000 open jobs.
My thanks for your time, your expertise, your willingness to do this.
So thank you guys. I really enjoyed it.
So